welcome to tonight's Spinal Cord Injury Forum. My name is Jeannie Hoffman. I'm a clinical psychologist and I'm the director of the Northwest Regional Spinal Cord Injury System here in the Department of Rehabilitation Medicine at the University of Washington. Tonight, we are really excited to have a group of people with us to talk about the Here and Now project. And just a little background from my perspective is that for many, 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 many years since I've been here at the University of Washington, people have often said, we need a support group. We need a place for people to gather. We need people to be able to meet up. And one of the ways that we've done that is here at the forums, and it's been a great avenue for that. But it doesn't really allow people to just socialize and learn from each other in large gatherings, especially because one of the things we know is that people live at a distance. And so when Here and Now really took off and developed, we were happy to partner and really excited to promote what they're doing and to really encourage people to get involved. And so tonight, my goals for tonight are two. One is to make sure that people who don't know about Here and Now know everything about Here and Now. The other thing is for somebody who lives elsewhere who may not necessarily be able to come to some of the meetups or events that Here and Now has going on, that they might be able to develop one for themselves. And so tonight we have Kenny Salvini, who's the kind of brains behind the operation. We have Marty Whitman, who has the historical perspective, and I think it'll be really interesting to hear kind of all the efforts that went in before this and what's different now. We have Addy Killam, who joined the board when it first developed, and her own experience, newly injured, and kind of how she went about finding people and how this has really worked for her. And next is Rob Wood. Also, you had the experience of getting involved earlier. But you also have a new website and a new addition to the Here and Now, and we'll hear a little bit more about that as well. So let's get started. So Kenny, you want to start at the beginning?
Yeah, I mean, we can flip over to the first slide on the slideshow. We'll linger here for a while. So I was paralyzed, C3-4 quadriplegic in a snow skiing accident in 2004. And as you know, everybody up here and a lot of people in the room can attest to, a spinal cord injury is one of the most disorienting kind of life changes you can go through. It's for me, it was about as much of an existential crisis and that I'd ever come across. And I was 23 years old. I was 8 months out of college. Was just getting a job in Seattle, and I hit a jump up at Snoqualmie Pass in the terrain park, going too fast, and I fell about 40 feet onto my head. And so suddenly I've got the function of a 6-month-old. All I can do is shrug. I actually drive this chair with my head. It is, you were kind of lost and confused right away. And 2004 doesn't seem like that long ago, but that was kind of in the transition from the modern healthcare system. The hospital stays and the rehab stays were starting to get shorter and shorter, and they've gotten even shorter now. And I'm sure Marty will be able to kind of attest to that kind of the difference in transitions that we get from the past to now. And so for the most part, right now the focus is getting people physically stable at best, so that we can send people home. And there's very limited focus on the mental, emotional, spiritual kind of recovery aspect. That's kind of how I felt when we first got to rehab. I got 8 or 9 weeks, and they got me off the ventilator, and they kind of sent you home with, the staple line that's, well, the cure's only 5 years away, and good luck, kind of thing. And so that's kind of what happened. They sent us home, and I grew up on Lake Tapps, and I moved back into my family's home, and I was on a literal and figurative island. It felt like I was the only person out there going through any of this. And so, my mom was a trooper. She would come up to the forum, and at that time, for the most part, she'd see people in manual wheelchairs, and that was about it. Wouldn't see people in the high quadriplegic range. And so it was kind of like, well, why go if there's no one else out there like that, like you? And but then, kind of what happened with my situation is I got home, wasn't very educated with my seating system, and I ended up with pressure sores that got me stuck in bed for years. And my home health nurses would come out. My mom would ask them if, do you see anybody like this out there? And they say, well, we have 9 in this county. And we're like, well, where are all these people? And so that was kind of that dark space that I found myself in. I didn't really think there was anyone else out there going through it. Nobody that I'd meet. I might see somebody at the hospital when I'd go cruising through, but I was, at 23, I was still kind of the mindset that I'm different than you people. You guys don't understand what I'm going through, that kind of thing. And so there was a lot of kind of my own hang-ups as well that was kind of getting in my way. And and that dark space lasted for a long time. I spent 6 years as a shut-in, never left the house. I would come up to the hospital if I had a surgery or an appointment, something like that. But yeah, for the most part, I might get up out of bed and sit next to my bed for the majority of my days. And it was a dark space for quite a long time. And then I got stuck in bed with a sore that kept me down for 2.5 years in a row. And that will break you of wanting to be a shut-in pretty quickly. It's like, okay, kid, you don't want to leave the house, now you don't get to. And it was about 1.5 years through that everything changed for me. And it was one connection that kind of saved my life and changed my life. And we can go to the next one. And it was a man by the name of Dan McConnell. I was at a random Kiwanis fundraiser in January of 2010, and I just started a relationship with a new gal, and it was kind of my first real romantic relationship since I'd gotten hurt that seemed promising. And up rolls this 60-year-old guy in a power wheelchair, and he introduces himself and tells me his story. His name is Dan, and he was paralyzed in 1970, a car crash. He was 19 years old. His girlfriend was 17 at the time, Gail. And then a year later, they got married, and then they proceeded to go out there and kind of do life together on their own terms. She was his primary caregiver for about 30 years. It was just the two of them kind of traveling all over, flying to Hawaii. I got to hear all these stories about her transferring him into the back of a pickup to go camping, and just all of these things that I thought were never going to be on my plate. I never thought that was going to be a part of my story. And it was a pretty powerful kind of a experience to finally see somebody, and to see a couple especially, that were kind of living this life and not letting them stop them. And that kind of gave me a whole new perspective on life. It really, it saved my life, because he introduced me to the idea of the ride cushion. We got to talking at that dinner and started talking about the pressure sore that kept me in bed for 1.5 years. And he's like, well, have you heard of this cushion? And I'm like, not at all. And as it would turn out, that one piece of equipment is what saved my life. I got into the ride cushion within 6 months, and I was healed within another 6 months. And kind of the missing piece there was the cushion had existed since before I got hurt. And none of my doctors or therapists really kind of brought that to my attention. And so that kind of twisted my thinking from, okay, instead of being different from everybody else in a wheelchair, I need to meet every single person that I can, because they might know something that I don't. My recovery is going to depend on the kind of hands-on knowledge, firsthand experience of people in wheelchairs that are living this life. And but where do you go? Where do you find these people? Especially, we're talking 2011, doesn't seem like that long ago. But social media was still kind of in its infancy. These days we've got all sorts of different groups online, but there really wasn't any of that kind of going on even 8 or 9 years ago.
Can I interject here?
Yeah.
I'm curious, Marty, for you to talk a little bit about, kind of just do a brief introduction about your injury and how long you've been injured, but to talk a little bit about kind of what was available back around that time.
Sure. Well, first, my name is Marty, and I was injured in 1982 in a high school wrestling accident. I was 16. And the rehab stays, like Kenny was saying, were quite different back then. I was in the rehab for 5 months and 4 days, and I think my roommate was in for like 9 months, and he was a C5. So that's how I got hurt, and that's who I am. And so back in the day, I was pretty close with the rec department at Good Samaritan Hospital because that's where I did my rehab. Kind of stayed connected to the rehab center there. And so we tried on a couple of different occasions to try to get this a spinal cord injury support group going. Probably in the late 80s, early 90s, mid 90s, somewhere's in there. And you know, one thing that Kenny has that we have on our side now, and Kenny has on his side, is the social media piece of it. That's been talked about. And also people are out a little bit more and a little bit more aware and a little bit more willing to be connected. So that was a big part of it. And then the perseverance. I look back and I'm thinking, you know, Kenny's really persevered and we really didn't. We got frustrated off the get-go. If we had our first meeting, we were gangbusters, we sent out some mailings, we were just really excited, and we got 1 or 2 people. And it was like, So we just kind of gave up. But I think if we would have persevered, we might have gotten it off the ground a little bit, maybe for a little while. But I think that's, and I give Kenny a great deal of credit for his perseverance and willingness to stick to it, and certainly using the vehicle of social media. So that's kind of small history. In the South End, we don't have a whole lot down there, so we really tried our hardest. But people just stayed isolated.
Thanks.
Yeah, I guess that kind of gives you the perfect jumping off point because even then I didn't have, all the tools that we have today to find other people. And if you click over to the next slide, I met a guy that a lot of us up here in the Pacific Northwest know a lot about, and that's Todd Stobelfeld. He's paralyzed at 8 years old, accidental gunshot wound, and yeah, like Marty, has been, kind of doing life since the 80s and really had to reinvent the wheel himself. And he made a point of kind of visiting people's hospital rooms when they were first injured. And he and I got our paths crossed. I can't remember the connection, but it's interesting. First time I met him, he told me I was an infant because I'd only been paralyzed 7 years. And I kind of took offense to that, but then, seeing everything that he'd overcome, it made a lot more sense. And in retrospect, in the last 8 years of growth that I've had, I can really look back and say, I really didn't know what I was getting into. And and it was in August of 2012, that picture on the right, it was a barbecue at Todd's house. It was the 25th anniversary of his injury, and got to hook up with Dan again and a couple guys that I'd kind of crossed paths with in rehab a few times. And then I met this dreadlocked individual that's also in the picture with Todd, Ian Mackay. And Ian's a bicycle accident from 2009, 2008. Yeah. And, we got in this circle and we're sitting around, and I guess one thing that probably I can add to the story is I wound up, I lost someone close to me to the disease of addiction, and I got introduced to the 12-step community, the fellowships of Al-Anon and AA, and it was kind of it's a spiritual program that's kind of focused on all of kind of the 5 different aspects of recovery: mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, financial, all of them. And as I was sitting in this circle of 7 guys in chairs, I had that kind of spiritual experience. This is the power of the human spirit, of people getting connected. And we sat there, and not only was I hearing my own story come out of 7 different guys' mouths, I got to hear Todd's mom tell my mom's story, and Todd's sister tell my sister's story, because I hadn't really considered how my sister kind of becomes the lost child to my injury, because what are your problems when your brother's constantly in the hospital? And we knew we were onto something that day. It was a game changer. And I remember my family wasn't there. I got home and I called them right when I got home, and I'm like, something happened, and it was just this feeling. It was, I'm not alone. I don't have to do this alone anymore, and it was just like, okay, how do we figure out a way to replicate that experience for other people? Because yeah, it's not rocket science. It's just getting knee to knee with somebody that's been where you've been. And yeah, and so we started playing around with ideas. We started having barbecues at everybody's houses. It was a monthly rotating deal where we'd go to one person's house, have a barbecue, but then at some point it started to grow a little bit more, and I can think of, we met a guy that lived nine minutes away from my house and had for 2 years. His name's Jesse Collins. C12 from a bicycle accident himself, and he literally across the kind of Puget Sound Valley from me. And and it was through that meeting that we uncovered some technology that completely changed how all us high quads use our phones and access the world. And so we figured out that we really need to start kind of spreading the message. And so that's when kind of took it upon ourselves to really get involved. And you can click onto the next slide. And we started showing up at everything, like any nonprofit that would have anything to do with paralysis, spinal cord injury, any of that stuff. We just started showing up. The forum here, I mean, if I didn't come because there wasn't a guy like me in those first few years, now it was like I have to come, because if somebody doesn't see that I'm out there, they won't know we exist. And so I got hooked up with the great team here, and I got hooked up with the Spinal Cord Injury Association of Washington and a few other nonprofits. And then it was through SCIW that they did a peer mentorship training through Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation, that suddenly we had all these there's probably 8 or 9 of us in chairs that I got to meet a handful of people that were really looking to make some of that change as well, and one of them was Addy. So, yeah.
So Addy, it seems like a great time to hear a little bit more from you. You want to first introduce yourself and injury and time since injury, but I'd be curious about your, experience from, the differences and similarities in terms of what got you to Christopher and Dana Reeve to that event as well.
Well, I'm Addy. I've been injured since March of 2008 with a surfing injury, and essentially I did some of my rehab here actually, and through the mentorship program here, I was lucky enough to have a really good mentor that I'm still friends with today. And she, I knew in the first early years I would have been lost without her. She also happened to live close by. She was similar level, injured at a similar age, and just a lot of things matched up. I mean, she even came to my house before I was out of the hospital, similar sizing, to help with, oh no, that's not going to be the right height. You're going to want to lower this or actually raise this, change this. And my family had no idea what they were doing. They were trying to do the best they could in the dark. So having her even just come down the street a few times was huge. And since we've been friends to this day, I knew as I went along and finished school and was starting to work, when the opportunity came up to participate in another kind of peer mentorship program on the other side, I thought if I could do this for even one more person out there, it's worth it. So I took what I could at the time, even though I wasn't an expert. I was still fairly early on in the first infancy years, as you will. And that's when I happened to meet Kenny and a few others, and heard about some of his ideas with where he wanted to go with something new, and thought, all right, I'm in. I'm all in.
Yeah, and after meeting Addy, there was like Eric Bell, Cody Hu, and then Todd was there with us, and then a handful of other people. We were really excited to kind of get hooked up together and see what kind of work we could do. And the Reeve training didn't really pan out so much out here. It kind of fizzled for the most part, and we were just kind of trying to find our niche, I guess. And I'd had the idea for the Here and Now project, just in name, because everybody's so focused on the cure, nobody's focused on today, but wasn't really sure what it would look like. Originally, it was going to be technology, getting people computers, but then a friend of mine that was helping with the graphic design of our logos found a website called I Had Cancer, and it's simply a Google map that's searchable by age, location, diagnosis, relationship, You just put your pin where you are, and then go from there. And so you can click to the next slide. And so that was kind of our idea. You can see our Here and Now logo is just the map pin. And so we launched at the 2013 SEIW Walk and Roll, and I literally showed up with this big poster board printout of a map. And we just put it next to the table, and I had people put pins in wherever they were. And it's red pin for survivor, black pin for supporter. And yeah, it's interesting. I just came across this picture just the other day when we were making this PowerPoint, and you can see the only pins are Todd, myself, and Ian right there, and which you can see later on. I think there might be a picture of the new map that comes in where it gets a lot more filled out, and yeah, so that was kind of what took off. We had the idea, didn't really know what it would be apart from them, and but the more people we met, I would show up to every one of these things, whether it was the summit for the forum or any other event that had anything remotely to do with spinal cord injury, and I would show up with my map and have people put their pins, but then I was also getting their information too, and I started to build kind of a master contact list and started to get in touch with people. And so about 6 months later, if you want to go ahead and flip to the next one, we had our first meetup. I was down in a barn in Fife. It was about 2 months after we lost Dan. Dan passed away just before, and his wife Gail played a major role in getting us into this barn. And it was kind of one of those flying blind kind of things. We weren't really sure who was going to show up. I put a Facebook post together with an event and invited all the people I knew, and we got about 17 RSVPs. And anybody that's done a Facebook event, it's kind of hard to track who's really going to show, and so we just figure, about a third of those people aren't going to show. But then 28 people showed up from C1 down to T11, like 13 months post-injury to almost 50 years. And and we added it up, and just with the survivors themselves, it's 355 years of experience, strength, and hope all under one roof. And that's only counting the people in chairs, because we had about 40 family members there. Like, at the time I had 10 years, my mom has 10 years experience, my dad has 10 years experience. Everybody has kind of, fought their way through this. Like my family's always said, there was no manual for these kinds of things. Once you get injured, you really have to kind of just find your way. And so I think if we added up the total, it was almost 1,000 years of experience. And it wasn't rocket science. We got in a circle, and I kind of said a little spiel, and then I just let the sparks fly. And suddenly people were making connections, and conversations were happening all over. And we made a breakout meeting so that the families could go into another room and have their own kind of private time. And that's kind of what I've come to learn, is that the family members get affected just like we do. And my sister got affected just like Todd's sister did, and they need kind of just as much support as we do. They need to be able to go into a room by themselves and say, this sucks, because it does, and it's, but somewhere out of our earshot, because we feel like a burden sometimes as it is, but it doesn't invalidate the struggle that they go through. And so what is the next slide? Did you have something that you want to jump in?
Well, I was just going to ask, at this point, it was still just a name on it had a logo, and it had you.
Yeah, it was an idea.
Mm-hmm.
I saw that map, and that was kind of the idea, but I didn't really know where to go from there. And that it was actually in that picture from the previous one is the first time I met Rob and the first time I met Marty. And so, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So how did you guys know about this? I'll start with Rob, because we haven't met Rob yet. Can you briefly do an introduction too, and then?
I'm Rob Wood. Motorcycle accident in 2013, and I was looking for anything I could find out, because I knew nothing about paralysis except I couldn't feel. That's what I knew previous. And I did my therapy at St. Joe's in Tacoma, and would ask for support groups or any kind of information, and I kept getting dead ends. And I started looking online when I got home 50 days later, and everything I found was East Coast or out of state, out of country. And out of the blue, one day somebody gave me the information to that meeting, and I went to it and been coming to them all since. The lack of the support or information I had made me want to be able to help get it to other people.
Marty, how did you hear about it?
Yeah, one day I opened up my email and there was a email from my good friend Elaine Stefanowicz, and she just said, hey, check out this event. You might want to go to it. She didn't know if she was going to go. I thought, hey, this looks pretty cool. So that's it. That's where I went. I was in Fife that day. Yeah.
So people took your Evite and sent it around to other people and sent it around to other people. So how many new emails did you get from those 28 people?
Oh, yeah, I think probably half of the folks that showed up were people we'd never met.
Yeah.
And one of the members that was Ian Ralston, an Iraq vet, was in Iraq when an IED went off and one ball bearing went through the back of his neck and left him a C1 quad, and that was the first time we'd met him. Him and his wife showed up. They live up in Woodinville, and they instantly got folded into kind of the high quad squad, as us high quads like to call each other. And it was pretty powerful. And suddenly, we had a model, but we didn't really know what else to do with it, that we could do one of these gatherings every once in a while. We weren't a nonprofit or anything like that, so we just kind of kept everybody posted. I can't remember, I think it may have been Marty that suggested we start a Facebook group. And that's when we started kind of a private Facebook group just to be able to connect with people. And and then the next slide is that's when kind of the breakout meetings started. It actually started before the Here and Now project originally, because Ian had been doing support meetings out in Port Angeles for years before he and I had met. And I kind of liked that model, and so we started securing library rooms or bars or pizza places, anything we could find where, like Marty said, that you get a place and you start to advertise and you hope people show up. And the perseverance I learned from Ian, because Ian has he said very often, you'll set up a meeting and it was literally him and his mom, and that was it. Just committed to showing up, and that's what it takes. And I had the same experience. We did a Puyallup meeting, and I think it was in 2015 we started those meetings, and it was literally my mom, my future wife, my caregiver, and myself. And then 2 months later there were 21 people, kind of thing. And I think that's probably the missing piece, like Marty talked about, is you've got to, it's feast and famine, and you've got to stick out the droughts to really, leave room for other people to kind of find out and trickle in. So, yeah. So it's kind of organically grown since then. It started, I think it was Port Angeles and Puyallup was pretty much where we were located, and then Ian started branching out to Squim, and then coming down to Silverdale, and then I got hooked up with, the more people I met, the more people were interested in starting a meeting of their own. And so I met folks like Lan and Laura Remy that started the Northgate meeting, and a handful of folks. The Ralston started one out in Woodinville, and now Addy's putting them together in Burien and SeaTac and kind of all over the place.
Yeah.
And so
Addy, can you talk a little bit about that, like getting one started and kind of what's been your experience so far?
I will say I strive to have a Puyallup attendance, but it oftentimes is pretty small, but you meet new people. Some will come sometimes. You won't see them again for 3 or 4 months. And part of the hard part is finding that time when most people are going to be able to come and you can find a place. That's been the hardest part of it, is personally I work shift work, so I don't always have the same consistency for availability to be that foundation pin to let other people come into. But we kind of took a bit of a break. We're getting started again, expanding more of a general South Seattle area, and hoping for some better attendance close by. We always try to think too, another nice thing about some of the libraries is that they're closer to bus stops, so no matter what your transportation is, that if you're on the bus or you're driving or if it's access or something along those lines, it's easy for people to get to. So that's something else we oftentimes take into consideration. So that some people who may feel like, oh, I don't have a vehicle, I can't come, we can still reach out and try to grab them as much as we can.
Yeah, nice to have a good bus system.
Right. Well, and that's the great thing about the library system too, is it's free.
Yeah.
You know, like a lot of meeting spaces will charge you, and which is the added piece with pizza joints. It usually got like the party room, and if you buy pizza, they'll let you kind of stake your claim to that meeting space. And yeah, and it's kind of it's really kind of, it keeps growing. You know, we've got my mom runs a parents and supporters group out of Good Sam. My wife Claire just started a wives and girlfriends group that's got its own private page, just kind of connecting with other wives. Well, they'll go out. You know, I think this one pictures them apple picking or doing craft nights or something like that. And yeah.
I'm curious, Marty, about early on. Where did you guys try and do your meetups? Where were?
Good Sam.
Yeah.
A Good Sam. Yeah, Debbie Jenkinish down there and I pretty much did it and tried to do it. But we just didn't persevere. I'm looking back, that's what we didn't really do. I mean, even my friends wouldn't come who were in chairs. That's pretty sad.
But why do you think that is? I mean, one of the things I always wonder about is
Always
being
has
at
an
the
excuse.
hospital.
Always have an excuse.
Okay.
I mean, and that is a piece as well that, you know, Marty jokes about, but then Ian and myself can kind of attest to, is it takes a little bit of cattle prod sometimes to drag some people out. That's, you know, because, you know, life gets busy and you know, things come up, but you know, the value that you get when you go to a meeting, because I'll get the same way where I feel, you know, it's an off Wednesday and I kind of don't feel up to it and don't really feel like it. But the minute you get there and you see people, especially if they're newer injuries or someone you've never met before, and it's like, oh yeah, that's why we do what we do, because it's that spark happens every time you meet somebody new. And it's because I mean, more often than not for me, I don't have something to share with someone, I've got something to learn from them, kind of thing. Yeah.
How about you, Rob? I mean, you're on the Puyallup side of things, correct?
Yes.
And so do you go pretty regularly, or do you kind of check out some of these other gatherings too?
I try to go to every Puyallup meeting. I've been to Burien a couple times, Woodinville, Silverdale. Try to get out to them when schedule allows me to, but like Kenny was saying, I like to go and talk with the new people. I didn't have that, so I want to try to help the new people have it so they don't have the experience I had and can get back to doing things.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Rob doesn't get enough credit because he travels all over. He lives in Spanaway and he'll show up in Woodinville, like 3 hours of traffic. I mean, this guy shows up all over the place.
That's awesome dedication, and I'm sure people are super appreciative to have somebody who's got some experience under their belt. Yeah.
Seems that way.
Yeah, absolutely. How about you, Addy? You're getting your own started and you're working. Are you?
I've gone to Northgate probably the most, besides when I've been trying to start on my own. I've been to Woodinville once or twice. I've been to Puyallup once or twice. Mm-hmm. But mainly the one I've gone to is Northgate, just due to proximity. But
yeah. How about you, Marty?
I go to most of the Puyallup meetings, and then I've been to a couple Silverdale, Squim. There was one in Olympia at one time, and so it's.
Yeah. So, Marty, being the person with the most years of experience in front of us with spinal cord injury, do you find you still get much out of that, or do you feel like you're doing the kind of teaching training?
No, not at all. There's always something to learn. You know, maybe the old way isn't the best way to do it. Maybe there's something that they've learned in rehab, or they learned on their own, or learned from somebody else that might be better. And no, you would think that I would be the one teaching, but not necessarily. No, I like to listen. So now more than ever, and maybe we're a little late with this here and now thing, but going back to the rehab stays, being so short, there's a lot missed there, and it can be made up by just coming to this group. It really can. There's no doubt about it. So I think we're filling filling a hole, a well-needed hole, a hole to be filled. So I'm pretty excited about it.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess you can jump to the next slide, and it's just, more than a support group, it's become a fellowship. It is a group of people that get together because they've got similar interests. It's not just, and I think that's one of the things that, the difference might be, and I've heard this from a lot of people like Chris, saying that, support groups within hospitals, people don't want to go back to the hospital. They don't want to kind of revisit that environment. And I know that was something that I struggled with when I first got hurt. I didn't want to go back to the hospital. And so, yeah, we've really, I joke now that it's like I throw parties with paralyzed people. That's really all I do. It's, we set up potlucks, we do barbecues, we do a gratitude dinner where, just get together, usually have some food. We've done adaptive bowling events, we've done laser shows, we've done all these different things, and our meetups have slowly grown as well. What started as a 3-hour deal in the barn that year has grown into a regular recurring get together in Tukwila that is kind of built out into a 2-day event where now we've got different breakout meetings for whether it's aging in a wheelchair or sports or relationships, whole bunch of topical things. And then the second day we try to gather as many organizations and nonprofits and resources, adaptive sports teams, and all these different avenues for people to see that there's a whole lot of life to be lived out there. And and I guess that's kind of one of the things that we've discovered, if you can go on to the next slide, is something I've called critical mass. This is our meetup from last September, and this is the second day, and it drew a couple hundred people. And it's what we've kind of come to understand is, where we were once isolated and alone, now we've kind of compounded our collective wisdom, and we've kind of elevated the waters for all of us. We've become that much stronger as a unit because we're not, going off to some spot to reinvent the wheel and struggle to find a phone or anything like that. And one of the interesting kind of aspects is that, we've all got these X amount of years of experience. Well, we've become subject matter experts at our lives. We have a lot of expertise to offer, not just other people, but the businesses that serve us. It gives us an opportunity to kind of inform them. And so we've been kind of exploring a lot of that over the last couple of years, bringing in kind of the larger corporations as sponsors and trying to figure out the best ways to kind of engage them, but also direct their business. Because, when we've got, a couple hundred people in wheelchairs that are, can tell you which product they like or don't like, becomes kind of a powerful group. And go ahead.
So when did it go from being you kind of doing a Facebook Evite to being the Here and Now project with a board and a 501c3 status and all of that?
That was about 2015, the summer of 15. I had a real good friend, Lori Harmer, who ran a nonprofit for cancer, for the American Cancer Society, and she kind of cattle prodded me into, okay, it's time to get 501c3 status and build a board. And it's one of those things that anybody that started a nonprofit just likes to say, just start a nonprofit, just get a board. It's easy, it's fine. I mean, you know people, so just make that happen. And that was a big hurdle for me. I started with the people closest to me. It was Cody Hu and my friend Lori, and then I started to drag in the people that were around me. So I dragged Ian in and Addy in, and now we're just starting to kind of build it out. Making contacts with kind of people in the outer circles and bringing them in with, board members from other nonprofits. We've got Wendell Mattis from United Spinal and stuff on board, and kind of trying to grow that influence in an organic way, but also kind of keep it wheelchair user driven.
Yeah. So, Addy, what made you say yes? What other than just Kenny asked?
Well, there's that too. like I said, from when I met him at the beginning, when it was just the ideas before the first big meetup in the barn, to where it was already going, that about a year later was the time frame, year and a half later, I thought, I do see the promise. I do see where his vision is going, and I wanted to be a part of it because I knew how important it really was. And without that continued support and having him do all the paperwork and then show up on the board, he did a lot of the behind the scenes, so it was an easy transition to step in and try to figure out how's the best way to help and what perspective can we share. And he's also, I think, kind of looking for a little bit of different perspective injury-wise. So being a lower injury, I think that was my shoe into the board. And give a different perspective on how things work and what my world is like for different perspective, really. So.
And it was her overwhelmingly positive attitude. She's just awesome. She's been like one of the cheerleaders we've had since the first big events. When we're showing up for the second day of our first 2-day event, it was like, well, we can bring adaptive games, and Addy was like all over it. And it's
pretty much.
You find the people that are passionate, and you get your teeth into them and don't let them go, pretty much.
Yeah. So it's a working board. They're not just hanging out and
Yep.
drinking coffee. They're actually, you put them to work.
I try to. It's this is an exercise in letting go, because I tend to try to do more things than I need to, and really kind of learning to delegate has been a process, and everybody's been really patient with me. But over the last couple of years, it's really starting to expand, and that's kind of where we're looking to jump off and go further. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
In terms of that, like that expansion, was getting the 501c3 status and getting the board together, did that really kind of take things off quite a bit, or was it already in that kind of growth at that time?
I think trying to find our way with the nonprofit status was, was a struggle. And I know Lori was kind of cattle prodding me a little bit to kind of get focused on the vision, and I think it's still kind of expanding as we kind of find our niche within the community itself and find the holes that we're filling. Yeah. And so it's just been in the last probably 18 months that we've really discovered some different avenues. From trying to find different ways to support the newly injured. My dad and I developed these water bottles pretty soon after, I met the guys, and so we started sending those all over the country, and so that was kind of our shoe into the hospitals with the peer support programs and stuff like that, and and so we're still kind of in that process of expanding all the programming, and we can go ahead and go to the next slide, Chris, and that's it's kind of expanding our outreach. We're building care baskets to kind of bring to the newly injured, just to say, hey, we're out here. You don't have to do it alone. And one of our newest initiatives is the DACWA Forum, which Marty is kind of one of the spearheaders to it. He was I guess I can just let you kind of speak to what the DACWA is.
Yeah.
Sure, it's a group of people that kind of spun off from Miss Wheelchair Washington, and so we kind of came up with this group. There's like 5 or 6 of us. And we really didn't know what we wanted to do, but we wanted to do something. And so we were kind of in the beginning stages of creating or getting a 501(c)(3). Is that what it is? Yeah. Nonprofit. And we were just like dragging our feet, and it wasn't getting done, and halfway through or almost done. And all of a sudden we hooked up with Kenny, and we got this marriage together, and Kenny said, hey, why don't you just do it under here and now? Yeah, great. So then we didn't have to follow through with that. But we thought, well, what can we do as a part of here and now? And this group right here, this UW forum, that's a bit more formal than our meetings in Puyallup and elsewhere. Maybe we can do a formal topic or a semi-formal topic in the South End. So that's kind of what we're doing on a quarterly basis, and we're just starting that right now. We had our second meeting, I guess, in February, or forum, I guess if you will. And we have another one in May, which I think is going to focus on sponsorship. And so that's kind of what we do at DACWA. and we're kind of just a little sister of Big Daddy here now.
Well, and it's another one of those situations where the Dakwa is a group of people that have been around. Man, I'm losing my voice. I know. They've just, I think collectively between 5 people, I think we added up about 200 years of paralysis experience. And these people have been around the block, and they've done a lot of really awesome advocacy for the community. And it was like another one of those groups. It's like, stronger together. We might as well work together and see what we can build. And then I think if we go to the next one, and this is one of the numbers that's kind of confusing and also maddening for me, because if you go on Christopher Reeve's website or some of the other spinal cord injury websites, you can't really nail down a number of, how many people are living in the country. And so, it's quite a wide range between 250,000 and 1.2 million people living with spinal cord injuries in the country. And if you break that down, it's 5,800 to 27,000 in Washington State. And there's the problem, because on our Here Now Facebook page, we have 300. And that's the thing. Where's everybody else? Are they stuck in bed? Are they stuck at home like I was? Do they not have access to transportation? Where are they, and how do we find them? And so that's kind of our next mission, is to build that map that I've talked about. And Rob can speak to kind of his idea that, if you go to the next slide, that this is, he calls it who, where, how, and I want it to look just like this: who you are, where you are, and how you do life. Because, if we can take pictures of our meals and share them on Instagram, we should be able to find each other. That's all I think.
So Rob, can you share a little bit about this website that you're working on?
It started as a school project. I just finished I was going to school for computer programming. They said I had to build a website that's database driven. So I was trying to think of something, and I'd seen this with Kenny's site, and we have some pictures too. That's the intro page, and I just kept thinking about things I didn't get or didn't know. I go to these meetings and I hear Kenny say, "Oh, I've got this information," and then somebody over here will say, "I have this information," and having to go through so many people to get things, trying to think of the best way to put it all together. And so I made this site, and we got the map on there, and you can cycle through. I'm not sure which. So it's a work in progress still, but as you can see, I have the icons telling you what you can look for, and if you want to just find people near you, and if you click on the icon, you can see in the middle section there's some information, resources, where to get wheelchairs. I knew New Motion was the only place I knew of until I met Marty, and then I started finding out about other sources. So having more resources like that, just trying to put it all together. There's another example. You can see what you can search by. I have even just tips and tricks. I don't remember who it was, Kenny, with the barbecue tongs.
Yeah.
That's a perfect example. I saw barbecue tongs on somebody's wheelchair. I have no clue why, but it was to pick stuff up. Just tips like that help the other people. Like Marty said, he's been in the chair a long time, but he still learns from us that are newer. So just trying to compile all this stuff together to where we have a good outlet that, we can find stuff. Like on that page, you can search for people and other things like cell phones. If I'm a T7, I want to know what kind of car I can drive. I only thought of vans when I got injured. I drive a car now. I didn't realize that was accessible. So just trying to make it to where you can find more. The best way to put it, I think, is real world answers. Go to the hospital, they'll tell you what they know, which are textbook answers, but they're never, I shouldn't say never, but they're not always right. Just so many things that's what they know. But however many years we have collected, we know a lot of other stuff from the actual real world. So trying to build upon that and just keep it, let us have more information that we need.
So this is going to be really cool. I think you said that you just kind of finished your class project and working on really populating this, right?
I'm still building it. It was the project wasn't just to be as big as I made it for class. So, and then
They
I
gave
kept
you credit
adding
for
things
that,
at the last minute. So I'm trying to get it fully functional and stuff, and then it'll be live online to where people can put their stuff in and start searching and using it.
So, and it's going to be connected to your website, correct? So that you guys can kind of just,
Yep.
if people are already on Kenny's site or on Facebook, you'll hear about when it's ready for launch.
Oh yes.
Absolutely. Is this just going to be a Washington website, or is it
No.
something that could go more broad?
My idea before talking with Kenny about it was reach out to somebody, be it the Christopher Reeves Foundation or somewhere to where I could get it into every hospital. Because like Kenny said, the HIPAA laws, they can't tell you the other stuff. But if I'm in the hospital and they gave me that information, I would have been looking stuff. For example, my first wheelchair was, I hated it. I got a new chair. And had I known what I know now, I would have never got my first chair. I would have bought this brand to start with. So, I've got a friend in Florida. She lives on a little island in Florida. She's quadriplegic. She says she's never seen another chair out there. So, having a site like this to where people can connect in the middle of nowhere even could be good. And so that's the goal, is to just branch out and be worldwide or just here, as long as it's helping people.
Yeah, that's that. Once I saw that map from I Had Cancer, it's that can go for anything. And that's, I bought youarehere.org a long time ago because I'd love to have this map be for anybody to going through anything. Like you go to You Are Here and you click on the drop down. I'm the mother of a quadriplegic. I have a son with Down syndrome. I struggle with alcoholism or depression or anything. It's easy in this digital age to kind of feel isolated. You get stuck behind your Facebook avatars and putting up the happy face for people, but there's a lot of people out there struggling with stuff. And if you could just have that experience that I had with Ian and Todd, to suddenly find out that whatever you're struggling with, you don't have to do it alone. That's the pie in the sky, the largest goal for here and now. But it's so far it's worked really well for us in this little pocket up here in the Northwest, and hopefully it could be something that could be emulated somewhere else. So.
Yeah. So, I always like to ask people to give advice. So for all of you, and I'll start with you, Rob. So for somebody who's newly injured and thinking about whether they feel like connecting or not connecting, what kind of advice would you give them?
That's a good question. I mean, everybody's different. I've heard of people that stayed home for the first 6 years or whatever. I got out of the hospital on Friday. I was at the Harley dealership on Saturday. So everybody takes it differently. So just try to find what you are interested in and get back to it and do life, as Kenny says.
Addy, how about you?
I think it's so important to find those connections. And even if you don't feel like talking, you can still show up and be quiet and slowly branch out and be more comfortable for whatever feels right at the time, whether it's showing up and not saying anything besides hi, this is who I am, that's fine. Or if you want to go and I need to know this, and this, tell me everything you know. There's different people, different ways to go about it, but I think it's important to get back out there, and you're not going to figure it out if you don't try. So that's what we're here to help with.
I really don't have anything to add, really. It's like Rob said, everybody's different. Everybody has a different comfort level. And so whatever you're comfortable with, it maybe today you're absolutely, no, I want to have nothing to do with people in wheelchairs. And then maybe as time goes on, okay, I'm okay. I think I might reach out and attend one of these meetings or talk to these folks and see if it might help. So it all kind of depends on your comfort level at the time. Doesn't do any good to push people because it.
What's the worst that can happen? You hate it and you don't come back.
Yeah.
Try it.
Yeah. Yeah. I still have a lot of friends, very, very close friends, who have never been to a meeting. And I tell them about it. It's just because they do their own thing and they prefer to just be by themselves or stick to themselves or do their own little thing. So which is fine. So it's all up to you, I guess.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Speaking as that guy that didn't want to see anybody else, and
I was going to bring that up.
yeah, well, and when I do peer support now, when I meet people, I give them my card and I say, if I don't hear from you for 9 years, I get it, because I was in that space. But I also tell them we're going to build it for when you're ready. And one thing, I guess, try not to take or put all your eggs in your medical professionals' baskets, because at the end of the day, I mean, we've got some awesome medical professionals, especially up here. But at the end of the day, it's a job for them, and for us, it's our life. And so don't take someone's lack of knowledge on one topic as the gospel. I was doing peer support at another hospital down south, and it was a newly injured person. I was in kind of a newly injured class with someone, and this medical professional, this person asked, well, like, where do I find that resource? And this medical professional said, me, I'm your resource. I'm all you need. And I was just like, no, that's exactly what you don't need. You need to find, like Addy said, like Rob said, don't stop hunting, don't stop looking, but also be patient with yourself too. If you're gonna have down days, if you don't want to leave the house, then don't leave the house. It's and especially these days with the advent of the Facebook groups. I mean, there's SCI worldwide Facebook groups where you can sit from the comfort of your home and really kind of feel your way out that way. But for me, it's the difference for me, because I mean there were forums and stuff like that online that you could find, but until you get knee to knee with somebody and you start looking at like, oh, what kind of chair are you using, or what kind of equipment do you use, there's like, that's where something completely different happens. It's like I said, it was a really spiritual experience for me personally, and it's something I'm kind of hooked on, and that's why we keep doing it.
It's the magic.
Yeah.
So one last advice question for you. If somebody out there was thinking about developing their own Here and Now project, their own thing like this, what advice would you give them?
The same thing. Don't stop. Always keep hunting. Find people that teach you stuff, and like I said, get your teeth in them and don't let them go. Really, see what you can learn from other people, and just always stay hungry in that aspect, because like I will never profess to think that I know what other people need to do. It's just find the people that can help and show up to everything. You show up to all the different nonprofit deals, the different expos, all that stuff, and you show up and meet people and just see what
It
connections
is your
you can
full-time
make.
job.
It is, but it's a passion project. I get something out of it every day. So
It's fantastic.
yeah.
Thank you all. I'm going to open it up to questions now. So questions.
I guess my first question is, do you have any idea why the numbers are but why we don't have better counts of who's paralyzed?
Well,
That's a huge range.
Well, I mean, if you couldn't find me for 6 years, kind of thing, right? That if I didn't want to be found or I didn't have the resources, I guess Jeannie might be able to.
Well, I think some of it too is how, like, what are you counting? So what is considered spinal cord injury sometimes includes a spinal cord disease. So it might include people who have paralysis for a variety of reasons. Sometimes people include anyone with a wheelchair user. And so that opens up huge numbers because that includes people like who have strokes and other kind of brain injury that require use. So depending on how they define it, those numbers can change dramatically. And I think you're right too. Some of that is how are people counted from the time of like a hospitalization. So there's some really good data that comes from people who are hospitalized and then discharged, but some people recover, some people don't, some people end up actually declining over time. I think that's why you get these very broad numbers. So if you even look at the Christopher Reeve site, they kind of have all kinds of disclaimers on what numbers they're using. So it's really difficult to kind of think about that number.
Well, and I guess that speaks to one other piece of advice I would say too, that and something we do with Here and Now, like we don't claim to be spinal cord injury only. It's like I've stopped looking for the differences and started looking for the similarities, because if I don't care how you use a wheelchair, or if you have some experience of lack of mobility, you understand my situation, even though you may not think you do, you do. Like, I mean, our Woodinville meeting last week, we had 2 folks with CP show up. One gal had never met anybody with CP, and we got to have a really good conversation about, what is it like to adjust to traumatic injury versus being born with impaired mobility, and you get to see both sides of the coin. You get to see, the advantages and disadvantages of things. So,
Other questions? Oh.
What did going from Here and Now pre 501c3 to getting that designation do for you, and what is it? How does that impact things?
Well, first we get to raise money, get to take people's money in all sorts of ways, but it opens doors. Rob and I were just talking about ways to develop the next iterations of Here and Now. When you've got a 501c3, you can approach schools. They'll do projects for you, kind of thing. Whether it's the Art Institute doing graphic design or something like that, like they need that piece to be able to justify schooling and stuff like that. And so, that's
So open doors that you
Yeah.
didn't have before.
Yeah.
And people are happy to give because they can try
Right.
to write it off.
Right. Yeah, it kind of legitimizes things. Takes you from being a stalker that's chasing people in parking lots to, because we do that. We're like, hey friends, here's a card, kind of thing. Yeah.
That's comforting.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions?
I was just wondering about how you find out about the various neighborhood meetings. You talked about Northgate and South Seattle, and is that on the website?
It is. It's on the website hereandnowproject.org, and we've also got there's a calendar rotating on there. We've got a Facebook page, a public page where you can see all the events as well, and then our private Facebook page I think it's called Here and Now Washington Paralysis Network, and so that one you add yourself to, and then we can let you in, because we try to keep that more private, so that people aren't getting kind of constantly barraged with sales pitches and stuff like that. So.
And if you're on the email list, so there's frequent emails with what's coming up in the next couple weeks, and also some future save the dates for bigger events.
Yeah.
So people can go to the website to sign up for the listserv.
Yep.
How do they get to the private
You
Facebook page?
Probably
Go
search
through
it out
you?
on Facebook, or you can search it out on Facebook. But when you go to hereandnowproject.org, it'll come up, and you'll get prompted to put your email in to be a part of our newsletter and stuff like that. So.
And then you'll have access. Great. Any last questions?
This is kind of a devil's advocate question, but maybe for Rob and Kenny or all of you to think about. Do you think there's any concern in having, in an age of big data, like worrying about having a database of folks who are paralyzed out there for people to access?
Definitely. Well, and that's why we want to build it properly, so you're protecting people's privacy. I mean, you're not going to be putting your map pin on your front porch so people can come around and solicit. Rob's talked about ways of like randomizing it a little bit, just so you get a vague sense of where people are. Also, that's something that I've noticed with the Facebook age. We give away a lot of our information for free, and what if there was a way that we could harness all of that subject matter expertise and sell it back to them somehow?
There's a lot of power in numbers, that's for sure.
Right.
Absolutely. But yeah, safety is really important. All right. Any last questions? If not, please join me in thanking these guys, and I'm guessing they'll be able to hang out a little bit.
Oh yeah.